Hello, Nathaniel Gavronsky here, and I'm going to talk to you about the legend of Sleepy Hollow. And what better place to talk to you about that than in Sleepy Hollow, New York itself. Now, the legend, the story of Sleepy Hollow gets its origins from the author Washington Irving. Washington Irving gets his name from George Washington. He was born in New York City on April 3rd in the year 1783. Shortly afterwards, New York City began dealing with a pandemic. Surprise, surprise. And Washington Irving moves upstate into a town known as Tarrytown, which was mostly settled by Dutch. And when the English took over the Dutch colony of New Amsterdam, this area mostly stayed Dutch, and its major benefactor actually transferred allegiance to the British and maintained all of his wealth and power. This is the town originally known as North Tarrytown, and Tarrytown in general, which origins early on in the history of this now state of New York. Now, Washington Irving comes up here and he falls in love with the tranquility of the outdoors and outside. He does get inspired greatly by the quietness of it and the easiness of it, but the kind of the outsider view that he was given kind of left him with a little bit of an interesting side effect of, an outsider coming into Tarrytown. He wrote the story of Sleepy Hollow in 1820, so it is just over 200 years old. He would travel around Europe, and he would even become the ambassador to Spain in the 1840s, but would return back to Tarrytown and would actually complete a several-volume biography of President George Washington just a few months before he died on November 28th, 1859. Now, the story about Sleepy Hollow is of this. Basically, a kind of a bumbling, very socially awkward school teacher comes into Sleepy Hollow and is in trying to, get a woman to fall in love with him. This woman is Katrina Van Tassel. Now, the story consists of characters that are fictional, but the names are real. Katrina Van Tassel is actually buried just down the hill from here. And there was a guy by the name of Ichabod Crane. However, he was not a school teacher, and I don't believe he was from New York, but he was a soldier that Washington Irving knew. A lot of the other characters had real names. Their participation in the plot of Sleepy Hollow never existed, and it's a work of complete fiction. But again, with fiction, with every little tale, there is a ground of truth into it. And oddly enough, the Headless Horseman has its origins in this area. Now, he is not the first story of a Headless Horseman. There have been Headless Horsemen that have been in fairy tales and tales dating back to ancient Scotland, Ireland, the Netherlands, Germany, Sweden. Many times the Headless Horseman is actually a protectorate of an area where he promised to protect during life and is now protecting after his demise. And other entries, especially in Germany, he is a moral character. He warns people of doing bad things even when no one's looking, because it will have a mark on your character and on your soul. And he warns a young woman in Dresden, Saxony, that if she continues to do bad things, that she might end up in the same position he is in, roaming the world without a head. And so a lot of the stories with the Headless Horseman is that of morals and of protection. The legend of Sleepy Hollow is a little bit different. Now, the Hessian from Hesse Castle helped the British during the Revolutionary War. Now, during the Battle of White Plains that took place on October 28th, 1776, the British and the Hessians were forcing the Continental Army out of New York City and out of New York itself and into New Jersey and then further into Pennsylvania. During the Battle of White Plains, there was a colonial cannonball that struck down a Hessian officer and blew off his head. Now, after the battles, a lot of times, and this is actually documented in journal entries at the time, they would try to go in and collect all the dead bodies. This particular Hessian was never found. His body was never found. His head was completely gone, obviously. But this Hessian, which they can document, his head was blown off at the Battle of White Plains on October 28th, 1776. that happened. Now, even in the story of Sleepy Hollow, Irving comments that there was a Hessian soldier who had his head blown off during the Battle of White Plains, and the story of the jack-o'-lantern being his head was because it was so close to Halloween, which had existed for centuries, that as he was using to replace his head as he was trying to find it. He roams the area, especially the cemetery, trying to locate people that, who are trying to find his head. Now, some instances of the Headless Horseman throughout Europe in the histories where he was actually carrying a head, but in the one in North America, the head is no longer present. Now, the movie, it came out in 1999 from Tim Burton, is a completely different plot, completely different story, and holds nothing to the original 1820 story by Washington Irving. Kind of pick and choose which one you like to prefer, but the Headless Horseman from the 1820 version is not controlled by anyone. He roams the cemetery, tethering his horse to different graves, and the idea is that his horseman's powers would end at the bridge down at the church. Now, the bridge is long gone, but the bridge was long gone, but the bridge did actually exist. The church is still here. There was a marker where the bridge actually was, and that's kind of where the origin of some of the story comes from, is that an actual bridge. Like I said, Irving used real people, even though they weren't alive at the time. He used real people's names in a fictional plot. The Headless Horseman in Irving's story would roam around during this graveyard, but his powers would end at the bridge, which is at the Dutch Reformed Church, and he couldn't proceed past that point. In the story, Ichabod Crane fails in his attempt to pick up Katrina Van Tassel and is leaving a party late on Halloween night and comes across a horseman and remembers the story by his major competitor in the seeking of Katrina Van Tassel's heart, the Headless Horseman, and he encounters a Headless Horseman in the story, but he remembers that if he gets to the bridge, and the other side of the bridge, he'll be safe. So him and his elderly, misfortuned horse, Gunpowder, and him try to escape the clutches of the horseman by getting past the bridge. And just as he gets through the bridge, he turns around to see if the horseman's powers have receded, and he gets hit in the head with a pumpkin, with a jack-o'-lantern. And then, Ichabod Crane never comes back. He never shows back up to work. He just disappears, and it's believed that the Headless Horseman got him, and then that's the end of his story, and that the Sleepy Hollow just kind of moves on throughout history. However, this town, Sleepy Hollow, New York, its original name is North Tarrytown. Sleepy Hollow did not exist as a real city until 1996, 1997, when the town of North Tarrytown changed its name officially to Sleepy Hollow. Sleepy Hollow Cemetery is behind me. Washington Irving's grave is to this side of me here, where there's people that are standing, and that is where Washington Irving is buried. He does have an estate here named Sunnyside. You can come and visit it. There is actually quite a few interesting things here in the village of Tarrytown and the village of Sleepy Hollow that you can come check out. But that's basically the story of the Headless Horseman. The mascot here in town is the Headless Horseman. He's pretty much everywhere to be seen. It's a very interesting story, and it is noted as being the very, very first American horror story, and it gave Washington Irving a great acclaim across Europe. Like I said, he was the ambassador of Spain in the 1840s, and he inspired a generation of authors throughout the 19th century, including Poe and Hawthorne, and is seen to be one of the first major American fictional authors. He did write several books of historical fact, and his multi-volume biography of George Washington is very sought after and is known to be very accurate because it is his namesake. So that's the story of Sleepy Hollow, the legend of Sleepy Hollow, and the history of Tarrytown, upstate New York. Hope you check out the original book. It is available in the Disney version of the movie, of the book. The animated cartoon is very accurate to the writing of the book. Please come check out and spend some of your money in Sleepy Hollow, help with the economy out here locally. And I wish you all a very happy Halloween.